The following story contains vivid descriptions of real-life crimes, violence, and disturbing events that may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. The information presented is based on publicly available sources. This content is intended for educational purposes and not to sensationalize crime. In winter 1957, a desperate search for a missing old lady leads the Plainfield police to the home of a most unlikely suspect. A quiet and polite middle-aged man who had lost all his family a few years back. The police officers entered the dimly lit barn to conduct a routine check, but what they found was a scene straight out of a nightmare. What they thought was a deer hanging from the ceiling was a human being, disemboweled and dissected in a most horrific way. There was no doubt that the headless body was that of Bernice Warden. As the police torch illuminated the dark room, the light caught a vile spectacle of body parts, skulls, and a stench that haunted the cops for days. This is the story of Ed Gein, one of America's most repulsive serial killers. Who was this monster, and how did he get away with these crimes? Let's take a trip down to where it all began. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications as we bring you the rarest true crime stories. The story of Ed Gein had traumatized the 50s, creating a ripple through time, and is remembered even today. Ed was born on August 27, 1906, in the small town of La Crosse, Wisconsin. He was born into a poor family that struggled to make ends meet. Ed's father was a drunk disciplinarian, while his mother was strict, religious, and dominating. When Ed was 8 years old, his mother decided that the town of La Crosse was too immoral to raise children. She wanted somewhere a bit more isolated, with less interaction with people whom she considered depraved. There, she would have more control over her sons, so she packed and moved to Plainfield. Plainfield was a remote village with a very small population. The family settled on a 150-acre farm, which was all the space they needed to distance themselves from outside influence. Ed's mother, Augusta, made sure that Ed and his brother Henry never had a normal childhood. They were punished for socializing with other children and were often locked in the house to maintain their purity. Augusta wasn't just devout to her Christian religion. She strongly believed that everyone around her family was unclean and a bad influence. She indoctrinated her sons night and day on how everyone around them was evil. Ed's father, George, was very abusive and spent most of his day drinking. When he wasn't drinking, he was preparing to give his boys a good beating. Augusta often intervened, saving the boys from physical punishment. Because of this, Ed saw his mother as a savior. In his mind, she was an idol. Over time, Ed dropped out of school as a teenager, plagued with financial difficulties and a lack of farm hands. He devoted his years to working on the family farm, hoping to one day own his own farm. The only obstacle in his way was his cruel father, who always found a reason to physically or verbally assault him and his brother. What happened next shook the family. On April 1, 1940, Ed's father came home drunk, stumbled around, and dropped to the ground. He died of a heart attack. After the death of his father, Ed became more expressive. He worked as a handyman and often got small jobs outside their farm. Everyone thought he was a little odd, but decent. Nothing seemed off about the young man, not even when his brother Henry died under mysterious circumstances. It happened in May 1944. A fire from nowhere began to spread on their farmland. The two boys, now men, were trying to stop the flames, but when the fire got out of control, Ed left his brother and disappeared. He later came back with a group of people, but before they got there, Henry was found dead on the farm. Medical reports said he died of a heart attack while trying to stop the flames, and the unusual bruises on his body were sustained while trying to escape the fire. The cause of Henry's death would be reviewed many years later when the awkward relationship between the two men came to light. Henry, who was the older brother, had his reservations about Augusta's ideologies and didn't care very much about them. Ed, on the other hand, took her preaching hook, line, and sinker. Ed didn't approve of Henry's rebellious behavior. Augusta, on hearing of Henry's death, had a stroke, one that kept her bedridden for months. Ed took care of her and nursed her to health, but Ed was unprepared for what happened next. On December 29, 1945, Ed Gein had another stroke, this time a fatal one. Ed was 39 years old at the time and was now alone, having lost 3 family members in the space of 5 years. Having lost the most important authority figure in his life, and someone he cared about more than anything else, Ed went into a deep state of depression and his mental state deteriorated. He became very reclusive, and many often wondered what went through his mind when they stared at his blank expression. The isolation ate deep into him. All he had was the mental image of a godlike mother who was everything to him. He needed to fill the void. He wanted something to live for, but in order to have it, something or someone had to die. As time went by, Ed found a new obsession, a woman named Bernice Worden. She wasn't a young, pretty lady like anyone would expect. Instead, she was a 58-year-old woman with a son who was a cop. The Worden family owned a hardware store that was run by the older lady, Mrs. Worden. Despite the significant age difference, Ed would hang around the store, searching for an opportunity to speak with Bernice Worden. When he finally dared to ask her out, she turned him down and showed no interest in him at all. It became painfully apparent that they would never work. The problem was, Ed wasn't going to let this go. He became desperate and hung around the store till it became obvious to the people around. He planned and plotted until that fateful day. It was winter, November 16, 1957. On one of the deer hunting days, when the town was mostly quiet as most men went into the forest to hunt for game, Ed had driven his truck to the hardware store. He walked in and asked Bernice Worden for antifreeze, which he paid for, and got a receipt. As Bernice handed him a receipt, that would be the last thing she sold. He then asked to see a rifle that hung by the window. And as Bernice turned to fetch the rifle, Ed made a decision that changed his life forever. He pulled out a gun and shot Bernice in the back of the head. 58-year-old Bernice Worden was no more. But it didn't end there. The nightmare was just getting started. Ed then dragged her corpse to his truck, loaded the body in the back, and drove home, leaving a trail of blood on the floor. No witnesses, no clues, except a receipt written out as the last sale to Ed Gein. Hours went by before Frank Worden, Bernice's son, entered the store and found the carnage that had unfolded. The blood trail on the floor said everything there was to know. An alarm was raised as Bernice was nowhere to be found. Frank's immediate suspect was Ed Gein for 2 reasons. The first was that he had been seen around the property, moving suspiciously for days. And the most profound reason was that the last receipt of goods sold was issued to Ed. This meant that he was her last customer before her disappearance. He might have information about her whereabouts. The team of police officers went over to Ed Gein's farm with the intention of getting information from him. The assumption was that he was the last customer to see Bernice before her abduction and might have useful information for the search. They found Ed at his neighbor's place and took him in for questioning, while another team went to Ed's farmhouse to search for clues. The officer entered the barn at the back, and as their eyes tried to adjust to the darkness, they saw what appeared to be a deer hanging from its heels. This was routine when hunters caught deer in the forests. Upon closer examination with a flashlight, the officers gasped. The look of horror on their faces as they ran out in fear and disbelief said it all. Hanging from the ceiling was the worrying sight of Bernice Worden's mutilated body. News of the murder quickly spread through the small village, but the police had only made the first of many discoveries. What came next was way worse than anyone had ever imagined. As the police continued their search through Ed Gein's property, they found the most disturbing things that took the case from murder to a way darker and sinister intent, revealing that Ed wasn't just a killer. He was a psychopathic serial killer with a deep mental illness that was far beyond comprehension. There was household furniture designed with human skin and body parts, human heads, a big jar of human noses, a hand glove made of human skin, another compartment packed with human privates, some of which were colored and designed. There was a waist belt designed with female nipples, and another jar that contained human lips. The worst of all were face masks of the faces of women he had killed, as well as a bodysuit made with the flesh of these victims. Ed's farmhouse was the headquarters of the most despicable things ever seen or imagined in Plainfield, Wisconsin. Ed lived his whole life with a religious mother. So where did his love for the macabre come from? After the death of his family, Ed was left alone. He began to spend more time reading books that corrupted his mind. Among these books were medical books, pornography, and even books on Nazi concentration camps. This certainly influenced his already fragile thoughts. Ed decided to quell his yearning for human remains the only way he knew how. He started digging up corpses from graves and taking them home. He entered burial grounds, dug up the bodies, and took them back to harvest whatever part he needed. Professional psychologists suggested that he was trying to recreate his mother in some way, especially because they were close in many ways, and much of his identity was tied to her. The tipping point was when the severed head of another missing woman, Mary Hogan, was discovered in his home. The victim had been missing for almost 3 years. Usually, Ed dug up female corpses, but it could be explained that he began to run out of fresh female graves, leading him to make his own corpse by taking a life. During interrogation, Ed Gein confessed to digging up bodies of dead females, and the police could see that he genuinely didn't see anything wrong with his actions. He admitted to finding fresh corpses through published obituaries and frequent visits to the graveyards in search of middle-aged to elderly female corpses. He preferred those that had a close semblance to his mother. The police visited the graves that Ed claimed to have robbed to verify the authenticity of his story. The cops found that the bodies were indeed missing a head and several body parts. It wasn't an act of revenge or born of hate. Rather, it was some dark form of love, a need to replace what he lost. It was also rumored that he tried to exhume his own mother's corpse right after she died, but he was unable to do so because of the dense sand and the concrete covering, which made it too much of a challenge. In the winter of 1957, Ed Gein was charged with murder. During the arraignment, the 51-year-old killer pleaded not guilty. The defense presented reasons for clinical insanity, which further complicated things. The judge later made a decision that stumped everyone. Ed Gein was declared unfit for trial and was sent to a mental institution in Wisconsin, where he spent years in treatment. Ed's property in Plainfield was burned to the ground and later auctioned off. After 11 long years, the medical team at the mental institution decided that Gein was now fit to stand trial. Once more, court proceedings began. After a week, the court had reached a verdict. Ed Gein was found guilty of murder, but was still tried as a mentally unstable person and was therefore sent back to spend more time in the mental facility. What startled people the most was his calm demeanor and immature nature, which was the opposite of what you'd expect from a typical killer. Many had hoped for a commensurate punishment for the crime, as more time in the mental facility didn't seem enough. On July 26, 1984, the world woke up to news that brought mixed reactions. Ed Gein had died of lung cancer, which had been spreading. He died at the age of 77. Ironically, he was laid to rest in the same cemetery where he often went to dig up corpses. He was buried beside Augusta Gein, probably as he wanted. His appalling crimes remain a stain on the history of Plainfield. His lore continues to haunt the inhabitants of Plainfield as crime enthusiasts form urban legends around his dark history. His influence even extends to modern American cinema. However, his crimes were far from fiction. They were real, and even though he wasn't driven by sadistic tendencies nor tortured his victims, he's remembered as one of the world's serial killers in American history. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to know how a student nurse disappeared after a visit from strangers, click on the link.